Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful opening this morning, wasn't it? Azul was amazing. Hi, I'm Vicki Saunders, and you are in the room for the Ancient and Regenerative Economies. Everyone knows what that means, right? Don't have to explain it. Uh-huh. Well, Anastasia is going to click her red heels and take us into the future. So we are all ready to go. So we have Ecko, Joe, Anastasia, and myself. We'll be with you for the next 50 minutes or so. And we're going to move right away over to Ecko, who is going to start us off with the practice and her presentation.
Kukstam, Henfla Kawea and Squash, Tutla Shukshuk, Tutla Tlakamshin, Tutla Astajan. My ancestral name is Kawea, my English name is Ecko. I am from the Intlakatmak Nation, which is interior Salish on the west coast of so-called Canada. And I'm honored to be here with you today and going to invite us to land in together. There's a lot that's swirling around as we enter into this space and as we acknowledge the times that we are in. And so I'm just going to invite you to take 5 deep breaths. 5 deep breaths recalibrates the system. So we're going to take a deep inhale, 1, and exhale, 2, inhale, and exhale. 3, inhale, and exhale. 4, inhale, and exhale. Last one, inhale, and exhale. Welcome to the space together. I want you to imagine that we are carrying an armload of bricks. We know that these bricks represent innovation and evolution. They're man-made. They have built the structures and the systems that we live in today. We know how powerful they have been in the creation process of the world that we know. And we also know that they are broken beyond the point of being able to fit together anymore. They are these jagged, awkward bricks, and we're carrying them around. They're really heavy. I invite you to imagine allowing the bricks to fall to the ground. Just watch them as they scatter around your feet. And for those of us who are still very set in these systems, we may feel the need to cling to some of those bricks, and that's okay. I just want to acknowledge that that's a thing that exists, perfectly normal and okay. You may pick up 1 or 2 of those bricks if you absolutely have to. But we're going to just witness, how does it feel to release the bricks? Let them fall to the ground. Know that you don't have to carry them in the allowing of the new world to rise through. Just see how it feels in your body and the imagining of releasing of those bricks. Now, if we were to fast forward time, the natural world grows over and around and through the bricks. It is unbothered by them. It simply just rises up, around, and through. These bricks represent colonization and capitalism. They represent the systems and the structures, harmful industries, extractive industries, the world that we live in, that we've been brought up in, that has caused the climate crisis that we currently are witnessing today. The first half of the work is to release our attachment to the bricks, our narratives to the bricks, our understanding of our relationship with those bricks. And in the release of those narratives, we allow the space for the natural ways of knowing to rise, for the natural world to shine through, because she already knows the way forward. We live in an abundant place. The natural world is wealth. In my communities, where we come from on the West Coast, we refer to what we call material culture. And material culture is our relationship with our medicine, our tools, and our technology. We are taught that everything around us in the natural world is either medicine, tools, or technology. Everything we need is already there, and it is always provided. We are always taken care of when we are in that natural reciprocity, that natural relationship with the world around us. So the first half in releasing the bricks is to decolonize. The second half is to indigenize, to listen, to feel, to be in reciprocal relationship with the natural world, to observe the patterns, the systems, the cycles. Our only job is to tune into what already exists and allow the natural flow of what is rising up. Kukstam, thank you. I'll pass it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ecko. So, Joe, where are we in the world in comparison to what Ecko is talking about? And what wants to emerge? And how do we get there?
So, I think it might be helpful maybe to build on your wonderful metaphor and talk a little bit about some of those bricks and how we might start to let go of them. Because as you've acknowledged, that's not an easy process, either for us as individuals, as societies, within an existing system. And also to just understand why that is the case. So in one of them might be fossil fuels and a kind of addiction to a fossil fuel economy. And you sort of think, why is that? And just one of the statistics that I always find astonishing is a single barrel of oil. If you do the maths to convert that to what that would mean in terms of hours of labor, of doing work, a single barrel of oil equates in energy terms to about 11,000 hours of labor. And that in itself tells you why we're so addicted to using fossil fuels. We are using that resource from the past, extracting from the past to do stuff today. And that has done some amazing things, right? But we have not approached that resource with the perspective of, if we can use this store of energy and value from the past, what are the most important things for us to use that on to make sure, for example, that we have great education or health? We have used that to fuel a very material consumerist culture and change the idea of what success and what good looks like and allow that to be defined by corporations and advertising campaigns. So there's that addiction to fossil fuels. And then there's some economic concepts which are so embedded in the way that we think that make them very, very sticky. And one of those is that more is better. And there's something in this which is quite instinctive, right? I've got a 10-month-old baby at the moment, and a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, and with many good things, they will certainly tell me that more is better. Indeed, my 10-month-old isn't talking yet, but I guarantee that one of the early words he will have is more. So we know that is something that comes from somewhere intrinsic within us. But we also know that it's possible to eat so many sweets that you're sick, right? there is too much of a good thing. And so one of the jobs we have as parents is actually to kind of try and help children work out when to stop, right? And yet we kind of also know we're quite bad at doing this ourselves, right? Just to use a different example, right? I set screen time limits for my 10-year-old. I'm even quite good at enforcing them. I mean, there is a hypocrisy there, if I'm entirely honest about the situation, which I'm sure many of us in our honest moments will recognise. So we've got that issue that more is better, and that is literally baked into the way we think, right? So that growth is what we define as good, and we're not even just counting good things when we talk about growth, because we're counting GDP, which includes lots of bad things too. Just any kind of economic activity is obviously good. And of course, the problem comes that if you have endless growth, right? Say you even say it's 2.5% growth a year. I mean, 2.5% doesn't sound very much, does it? Right? 2.5%, that's quite small. But that means if your economy grows by 2.5% every year, that it doubles in 30 years. And in a century, it becomes 10 times as big. We understood about the challenge with exponential change during the pandemic, right? So exponential growth is problematic when we have one planet, right? We don't have 10 times as many resources, right? It's just not going to come from anywhere. And actually also, if you look at the resource usage, it has tracked GDP. So we're having to confront these issues, and yet it is difficult because it's kind of conflicting with inner stories and narratives that are, of course, then held in place and reinforced by that very economic system. But there are really lots of places where this is being challenged, right? So you just need to look at well-being economics, right? Which I know the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is here today, which is taking forward this kind of theory and set of concepts. And I say concepts plural because it's not like one prescription, but it is a way of thinking that the purpose of an economy is actually about, well-being of living things, right? And therefore, we should judge the economy according to that. And 6 governments, including Canada, have signed up to the Wellbeing Economy Governments Initiative. Now, this isn't perfect, right? This is still governments operating within the existing system and trying to work out how they might do something differently, how they might have different indicators of progress. But they are at least thinking about how to try and do it. Similarly, you've got Wales. They've got a Future Generations Act. So they actually have somebody, a commissioner, whose job it is to be the conscience of the government to argue when the rights of future generations are being impacted by decisions taken today. So these are some examples. Another one would be donut economics, which many of you will know about, Kate Raworth's concept. Again, redefining how you think about the donut. That the inner ring of the donut is meeting everybody's needs, basic, health, education, food, water, clean air, meeting the needs of people, and within the outer ring of the donut is the planetary boundaries. Really beautifully, I've seen a reinvention of the donut according to Maori principles, which actually puts it the other way around and has the foundation being the earth and then the social needs on the outer ring, and in fact uses spirals and their own Maori motifs to really make it their own, which is a beautiful reinterpretation of a powerful concept. So there is a lot to be excited about in terms of new ways of thinking, and of course bringing it about is challenging. And I know we're going to have lots of discussion, so I'll conclude just by saying that there's often a discomfort in straddling these two systems, in recognizing that the old bricks need to be grown over but still holding on to one or two, because you're also trying to actually change the system that you're in. And the people who are trying to bring new economies, perhaps with old wisdom, into being are often straddling the ambition of where we need to be with the reality of where we are now and how we might take those first steps to get there. And so I just wanted to name that discomfort because it often can feel a little bit like there's a tension between ambition and making change.
Thank you very much.
Maybe if I may just come in a little bit, Joe, and I really appreciated how you've named a number of paradigms that I think we're starting to put words to, and that's where the different economic thinking. But I just wanted to maybe acknowledge something, and I don't know if most of you in the room felt this way, but there was definitely a moment in my professional career being in corporate finance when I all of a sudden could see the system, and I could see it so clearly. And I realized at that moment that that system is set in stone, and that that system works like a Swiss clock. It's working perfectly. You know, we keep on saying we have to change the system. We keep on saying we have to mend the system. The system is not broken. And I just think it's important that we acknowledge that the system is working exactly how it's meant to work. It's just working against a lot of us. And I think that without naming that, we keep on sort of feeling that, well, if we just tweak this, if we just tweak their GDP, right? We just move that away and put something else, or we just all agree that the growth should be different, or we put a top on the growth. But this is, so that's one thing that I just wanted to pause a little bit and to say that system was put in place to undo the world that Ecko painted for us, and the world that was clashing with somebody's worldview. And because that world was clashing, somebody put the system in place. And so that's the second point. I just wanted perhaps us to pause on. This system is not natural, it's artificial. Somebody has built this system, which means one thing and one thing only: we can build something different. So this system on one hand is working perfectly, but it doesn't mean that another system is not possible and that we cannot put that in place. We can, we just have to put it on a very different set of values. The patriarchal colonizing values that made this system possible, if we use the same values to build another system, it will end, and we just tweak, you know, measurements, or we tweak what we define as growth, it's still going to end up in the same paradigm. So we can build something different. We just have to go back and look and say what values led to this system, and then let's just undo that part. And I just wanted to sort of bring this in this point of discussion.
Literally perfect tee up. Thank you very much. I'd actually like to go back to a story of when the white men came to Turtle Island, which is what we now call North America. And when they arrived, they were met by indigenous folks who offered them gifts, which is a way of building relationship in indigenous culture. There's always a gift that's offered. And the white men did something very curious with the gift, according to the local indigenous folks that were there. We held on to those gifts. And they watched us and they wondered, what are we doing holding on to these gifts? Gifts are meant to be passed along in flow. And so they asked for the gifts back because we weren't doing it right. And we created this incredibly derogatory term called Indian giver. That's where that comes from. Because we had a completely different paradigm coming over to this indigenous culture. In an ancient indigenous culture, there's a thing called the potlatch. I don't know if people have heard about the potlatch, but once a year, you gather together all of the excess resources that exist in the community and you bring them to the longhouse. And women are in charge of the longhouse. And they pass out all the resources to benefit all. So anytime there's an accumulation, it is put into flow and kept flowing. And so I'd like to just share an example of an economy that's out there that is working on creating a flow of gifts on behalf of the whole. And it's a community called Coralus, which a number of us founded in Canada, starting in 2015. And the idea was we were going to put what we have in abundance, in excess, that we don't need, into this community container. And so there was a little bit of money everybody put together, but then they brought their social capital, their navigational capital, their influence, et cetera. And we called forth entrepreneurs who had interesting ideas for the new world, new ways of doing education, new ways of doing plastics. How about no plastics? And we provided 0% interest loans to these entrepreneurs, but then we brought all of our other resources. And it created this incredibly expansive environment where businesses could really thrive in a new way. And this model has expanded to 5 different countries. We have funded 190 really interesting businesses that are out there, one of which is a company called Better Packaging from New Zealand. And they wondered why none of our courier packaging is recyclable and compostable. And so they created compostable courier packaging, first in the world. And then they realized this just wasn't enough because everything was accumulating, especially during COVID, just landfills everywhere full. And they thought, I wonder if we could actually go and use the pollution, grab the pollution out of the rivers and waterways of impoverished communities where it's accumulating before it gets into the ocean, and use that as the raw material for the courier packaging. So they've created a formula which allows that. And so they go into these communities and they hire folks. They basically seeded an ocean cleanup economy. But investors don't like this because it adds a complication. We'd rather use virgin materials, oil, virgin plastics, even though this is cheaper to produce. And as it scales, it heals the planet. So we're stuck in this mod of extracting only instead of healing. And this mindset shift is absolutely crucial to get us to a new place. So this, how are we going to actually shift our thinking? And one of the things that is happening in our community is we're all in relationship together, investors, entrepreneurs, advisors, influencers, policymakers, all learning from each other about what's happening. When we're in community together, we can start to actually understand how we need to change ourselves in order to get to a place that we want to. And all the decisions made in this community are through intuition. There is no investment committee. Everybody votes for what kind of future they want. And then you learn together doing this. So this is a regenerative economy that has started up and is starting to scale, that continues to sort of bump up against Extraction Inc., which is what I think we're living in, and how we might shift that. And so Anastasia, I want to turn to you. And like, what sort of radical capital strategy might you deploy for something like this to shift the paradigms?
No, thank you, Vicki. And I feel that you've described an example, but there are many amongst you here who are each building an equivalent example of an ecosystem. You've already been doing the work. And all those relationships, all different ways of underwriting a business or a venture or an enterprise, you've already established those. It's just that because you feel you're working on the fringes, it's almost like it constantly feels like a struggle, where you're spending 90% of your time trying to showcase this and try to get some capital into what you've built. And for me, it was really interesting today listening to the earlier panel, because this word risk kept on coming up. So risk, and if you're building a different type of economy or you're building a different type of even enterprise, you are right away, the way you kept from an existing system is you are labeled risky. And nobody wants to deal with something riskier, right? And it was interesting for me because I come from corporate finance and in impact investing, impact finance. So I've sort of been around this word risk a lot. And when I think of who actually takes on a risk, like who is actually laboring risk? Well, it's not those that provide the capital. And I hate to say it, but I actually think the capital holders shouldn't be getting any return on their capital. They should be paying for the privilege of deploying their capital into the solutions that are making their wealth stand a chance. And what do I mean by that? Anybody who is a holder of wealth, who is in this room, is already understanding the new paradigm. If you're a holder of wealth, and let's assume for a second that your wealth sits partially in real estate. Well, with the climate crisis happening, I can guarantee you, without even quoting anything, that the value of real estate in your holdings will be less than what it is today in 10 years' time. It will be less because of the climate crisis, because those properties will have to be replaced, and it's going to be extremely expensive to replace them, and nobody's going to want to provide capital for that. It's because those who are living in those properties will not be able to pay the rent for a whole number of reasons. all that, and the banks who are financing all that, will definitely start putting different risk parameters on that real estate. So you will have to start putting more and more equity into that real estate. So if you're sitting there today and you're looking at your wealth, and let's assume a third of it, which is normal, is in real estate, then in 10 years, you can face 50% depletion of your endowment or your portfolio. And now, here's this ecosystem, this alternative economic models that are already in place, that have already spent years putting perfect underwriting structures on a different set of values, not colonizing patriarchal values, different set of values. And they're offering to you to say, come deploy capital here, and we will make your real estate worth a bit more. You will not lose half of your real estate value. You will lose less, because guess what? We are trying to overcome climate crisis. We're trying to overcome social crisis. So shouldn't you be paying us for that return? Because it's triple digits for you if you actually look at what your real estate will be worth. So shouldn't you be paying us? Because we will be doing the labor. We will be taking on the risk. Anybody who's ever taken on capital, ever, and had to work with somebody else's capital, feels the risk in their bones. They know what it's like. You don't sleep at night. So not being compensated for that labor is what this model got really wrong. And so that's my first premise, is that I don't think we need to be begging for the capital. I think, if anything, the capital is not only going to come, but we should be very clear on the terms of the capital. You pay those who accept it, because those who accept it are doing the labor. So that's the first thing. And again, this is where I feel very clear that we don't need to justify why this regenerative models is a place to allocate capital. Because again, anybody who is concerned with being a steward of wealth, anybody who wants to see their wealth still exist in 20 years, well, doing a 4% granting, if you're a foundation, won't get your wealth to be there in 20 years. It's just not enough. This is why hedge funds right now are putting billions into foundations that they're down spending every year. They're not doing that out of goodness of their heart. They're doing it because their positions are so underwater that the faster they can spend the money through that foundation, the more chance they have to actually have some kind of return. So anybody who has a portfolio, the smartest strategy you can do is one is to allocate the funds towards this regenerative economies, which again, there is no risk because they've been in place. The relationships are grounded, the trust is grounded, everything is there. All you have to do is just be a tool, as Ecko, as you've put. That's all. Capital is a tool. And the second thing you would do if you actually allocate funding to this models is you would be seeding a new type of assets, which if you're a wealth holder, a smart wealth holder, that's exactly what you want to be thinking. What asset class is going to thrive in 20 years? I can tell you that industrial agriculture is not it. So what asset class do you want to seed now so that in 20, 30 years you actually have the value that you can show? Because if you're a steward of wealth, that's your only job, is show value. So I would say that's why convincing is no longer needed. Anybody who is thinking through this, and again, hedge funds are already there. This is a perfect hedging strategy. So anybody who is not thinking this is actually it's not even being a futurist, it's just not having pragmatically looked at 30 years down the road. And so those would be my two main positions. As one, capital now needs to shift who pays, who holds the risk and who pays for the risk. Two is there is no more reasoning of why this needs to happen. It's clearly evident. And again, the return to whoever allocates capital is triple digits. So it is the most prudent investment strategy to actually follow. And then the final part is, because being on the capital side, once in a while I still get the question, but there's no pipeline. There's nowhere to put the money. And I just say, really? Come to this room. How many of us, how many individuals here have built the ecosystems with money like 150 million, 200 million could easily be allocated. So you don't need to create some kind of innovative strategy for your fund or endowment. all you need to do is allocate the capital towards these ecosystems. And trust me, the return will be there.
Boom. Yeah?
May I feed?
Please.
So I would like to invite everyone into a term called 7-generation thinking, feeding off of what Anastasia is sharing. And so in my culture, and I just want to like bring you back to a visualization for a second. So if we can imagine that we are standing on a timeline, and if we were to look backwards at all of the generations and the steps that brought us to where we are today, we witness the impacts of those steps that have been taken. So in our teachings, we know and understand that every single step we take in this lifetime impacts the next 7 generations. So when we go and harvest plant medicine, when we work with the reciprocal relationship of the land, we are taking steps to ensure that those plants continue to grow. So when I harvest, one of my favorite medicines to harvest is gachmin. I will only ever take enough to fill a jar, and the rest of it I will take the seeds and I will actually spread them so that they continue to grow, so that next summer, the summer after that, we continue to have these beautiful growths of my favorite medicine so that my children can come back and they can harvest these medicines too, and they can build on that, those seedlings that have been planted. So every single step we take, we are thinking 7 generations into the future, and how is this impacting my great-great-great-grandchildren?
And I mean, what our current system is doing is actually the opposite of that, yes. Right? So just to be clear, and it, you know, the discount rate is the kind of technocratic term for it, but you know what that basically means is that we literally discount the future. It is worth less to us than today. And I mean, I don't think that even fits with our current values necessarily, right? If you ask most people what matters most to them, they're probably going to say, if they're parents, that it is their children and their grandchildren, their ability to thrive, right? So it's not even fitting in with the values of our culture, and it is absolutely critical in terms of driving this destruction that we see. So, you know, this is why one of the top economists who won a Nobel Prize, William Nordhaus, can come out with a climate model where he basically said the optimal degree of warming is somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees. Right? That's literally what that model says. And in that context, it's no wonder that our economy is careering down this pathway. Whereas actually, if you look at somebody like Nicholas Stern, who, again, you might not think that he goes far enough, but certainly, you know, it was 15 years ago now that he produced his report that basically set out to say, look, the cost of not taking these steps is going to be way, way, way higher than the cost of taking these steps. We need to make a significant change. The biggest difference was that he used a different discount rate. He said it should be a much lower discount rate, and actually for lots of different categories of events, when things like extinctions are going to be considered, then you should effectively have a rate of 0, as in the future is worth the same as today. And so the kind of the models that underpin our economic systems, they kind of create a false sense of security. So I think hearing what Anastasia you were saying there as well about like, why is it that finance is still being allocated to fossil fuels and these decisions are happening? I think a big part of that is a complete denial of the loss that is already the financial loss and also actually the horrendous, you know, cost that will be borne by people in terms of their lives and indeed non-human life on this planet. There's a massive denial of what situation that actually is. I think there's a lot of people going along thinking, well, it's fine. Somewhere there's a room of clever people that have figured it all out and they would have told us if there was a problem. Well, there is a room of very clever people. I mean, there's, you know, lots of scientists on the IPCC and of course this goes far beyond climate who have been sounding these warnings, but they haven't been properly integrated because there's these very, very flawed analyses that then get baked in as if they are certainty. So yeah, I think that, you know, sadly, I think what that leads us to is a scenario where it's only when it is so urgent and therefore too late to take many of the actions that we could now that you will actually get that kind of institutional response from our systems. And maybe the pandemic is an interesting parallel there, right? at what point did our societies recognize the need to do something very different because of the pandemic? Well, it wasn't in the Western world when we saw the pandemic emerging in China. I know from a UK perspective, probably what was very influential was seeing the television news from Italy's hospitals being unable to cope, because we could see a parallel there and think Italy's a country maybe a bit like us. And actually it was the public who took the action first. Before the government made the decision to lock down, companies, organizations were all saying people are going to work from home. That's what we need to do, before the government even acted. Now, that doesn't give us huge hope about how those systems will necessarily respond, but it sets what that challenge is, right? How do we get that public awareness to create the momentum to make these very significant changes? It's a crucial part of the picture, and it is sadly amazing discussions places like this, but it is not there yet. And again, you just need to look at the tenor of the current election debate that we have in the United Kingdom general election right now to know that these issues are not high on the agenda, certainly not of the people putting the questions to the politicians, but crucially also not in terms of the conversations that are being had on doorsteps as well. And that's a big barrier that we need to get past.
And I would just maybe I'm a little bit cynical. I grew up in Soviet Union where government was everything. Truthfully, you were taught as a 3-year-old, whatever you say, it says at home, just never repeat it outside, because government is everywhere and it's everything. But it also had incredible social systems, etc. And I've lived in a place where government was everything, and then when Soviet Union fell apart, I lived in a place where there was nothing. There was no government. And so I'm a bit cynical in one or another. So when I think of sort of what is the pathway, and yes, we have all these different economic paradigms that are emerging: degrowth economy, donut economy, regenerative economy, like a whole number of other economies. And I actually think there's another answer. I don't think it's the government. I don't think it's pension funds recovering their conscience, because honestly, when you're an executive at a pension fund and for 40 years your bonus has repressed your conscience, it's really hard to wake up one day and say, I have a conscience, when you do at home, just not at work. I think there's another way, and I have to say Coralus has showed me a very real example of how this is happening. So the truth is there are a whole number of ventures, there's a whole number of ecosystems that are already transforming industries. They're already addressing the core societal and climate issues. And they're already doing the work. They know all the answers. So for example, Vicki, you were talking about better packaging. So better packaging has identified that truly there's enough pollution, ocean pollution, plastic as a raw material to satisfy all our plastic needs. Not a single plastic ever has to be produced again. So they know what the path to transformation is. We don't need to invent a solution. They have identified the solution, and they know what are the actors around them. Others are doing the same type of solution. And so they already know how their industry is going to be transformed, and they have a good understanding of how much capital they actually need. They need to start around 40 million to just open up the formula to everybody and start building the supply chain so that in all the communities where ocean plastic is being taken out of the ocean, right away you can recycle it into and then you can use that product in everything from clothing to anywhere where there's plastic. That's the next raw material is the polluted ocean plastic. So my point being is, I don't think we need to wait for pension funds. I don't think we need to wait for the government. I think we need to allocate capital towards these ecosystems of transformation that are happening around a specific problem, whatever that problem is. If it's putting energy in the neighborhoods, there is already solutions. We know that there. So as long as we start allocating capital towards this transformation hubs, right? And they have to be self-organized. We are not the ones who should ever be saying, this is what has to be the transformation, this is how you do transformation. No, it's those who are doing the transformation who know what the solution is. All we need to do is put capital there and give them the freedom to do what they're doing. And they already have a 15-year plan. We don't need to design. And And we don't need to ask them for impact measurements. We really don't. We don't need the dashboard of impact measurements. They know what the impact is. Let's just ask them to, if you want, a hope dividend. Just a hope dividend where you essentially just say, what hope have you created with this, if we really want any measurements. But I think, so I don't think we need to wait for anything. Just allocate capital. And that's when you're going to see everybody else following. The government is going to start noticing. The pension funds are going to realize this is the smartest, best thing to do, and they will follow. So I think that's all that's needed, is that first step.
I think, thank you very much. Love all the things you're saying. One of the pieces here that we're noticing is, I was at a dinner the other night, and I just feel like everybody has a PhD in what's not working. Everybody. Yeah. And it's exhausting, right? It's like one-upping each other on how the shit show is like the shittier somewhere else. And it's this practice of like focusing on what is working. Who has an open pathway? Who is finding a new way? And sharing that together is just so incredibly critical. But part of the thing is this imagination. It's like we've sort of in the every single day fear marketing that comes your way. Every single thing is about fear. And really the product of capitalism seems to be insecurity. No matter how much you have, you're just like, don't think it's enough. And so how can we get into this collective dreaming space? And I mean, it's incredibly energizing to be bold, to say something bold. I just feel like there are people out there waiting for something that sounds crazy. That's what we need. We need so many crazy ideas. I mean, when we started doing Coralus in 2015 and we did 0% interest loans and the due diligence was 500 women, grandmothers, kids, all the people that were in the community just voting. Everyone's like, that's insane. Like, what are you doing? Who's on the investment committee? And we're like, everybody. It's intuition of voting is creating this. And you can create these incredibly expansive possibilities when all of a sudden you walk into a place where 500 women go, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing. That should exist in the world. Let's make that happen. It changes all the conditions. It's not like, here's your money over to you. You better get my money back. It was, how can we all be part of creating a world where this thing becomes reality? And it's just flipping things around. And so the more that we can actually come out with these bold ideas, and as Anastasia's saying, walk into funders and go, your $20 million, your $50 million is going to be stewarded by 7,000 folks in this ecosystem who are all committed to creating the conditions for transformation. How lucky are you? That's an amazing thing. And we're going to just keep this money rotating forward forever in this community because everyone feels compelled to be part of creating everyone else's success. And so I think this call for boldness, this call for imagination, and this deep work to release our stories of how things are, and this is the only way it can be, is the deep work. And we heard that in the morning of like, we are the work, we have to do the work on ourselves of unlearning. And I think you're doing quite a bit of this work, Ecko. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing and how you approach this? How do we get out of our own stories?
Our stories are it's everything. So our bodies are amazingly intuitive. And in my teachings, our bodies are directly connected to the land. And we have become so far disconnected from the land, from each other. Is anyone familiar with the term like nuclear family? Where we're separated in silos, and the individualism that we're taught, all of that is a separation of mind and body. Of body to land, body to, emotions to the emotional connection to other people. And so in the restabilizing of who we are as whole humans on the planet and how we choose to show up in the evolution of the world that we want to see, it's a reconnection of listening to our bodies. They are so incredibly intuitive, and they will speak to us long before our mind will finally click in place and go, oh, this is what this is about. This is why I'm having breakdowns about everything, right? Because the stories, the narratives that we carry impact every single decision that we make. And if we are not physically rooted in our bodies, and our bodies are physically rooted to the lands and waters, to listen to her, to listen to what she has to say, to listen to her incredible wisdom and wealth, then we are continuing to just spiral off into these stories and these narratives that we carry about the world that we live in. So the work that I do is really focused on bringing people back. I work with organizations, Indigenous communities, and individuals, offering different teachings that support the work that they are doing. And all of it is centered around whole human healing and well-being, reconnecting us back to the earth and back to a natural rhythm and understanding of who we are as whole humans in this space. And this very much means pulling apart those narratives. Because we're tricksy. We are very tricksy in the stories that we can tell ourselves of why we do the things we do and why we have to work in a certain way and live in a certain way, right? Our mind is so incredibly powerful. And so the minute that we bring ourselves back in, do you ever, like in a moment of laughter, I've heard some laughter throughout this so far. Do you notice what happens in that moment of laughter? Like maybe your mind was wandering for a moment, but there was something funny and it caught your attention, and suddenly, have you ever tried laughing not present? Maybe you're on your phone, someone says something funny, but you're like, heh, right? So in this moment, you found something funny, you laughed, it brought you back into your body. Laughter is such a beautiful tool to bring you back home to the present moment and back into your body. We can't express laughter when we're up here and over here, right? So as we are healing as whole humans, cannot continue to cause harm to each other or the planet. We cannot. When we step into this expansive space of understanding our interconnectedness as all living relatives, we cannot continue to harm each other. We will naturally live in reciprocity, live in abundance, live in support, and those intuitive circles, right? Those intuitive, beautiful, beautiful circles where we are trusting the magic and the process and the evolution of the energies that rise up. We are trusting the innovations that come in. And so I want to invite you into just an idea to step away with. And it's looking at what is the pace of capitalism? What does that mean? What does it mean to you as an individual? It'll mean different things to each of us, and that's exactly the point. We have all been taught to work at a very specific rhythm, a 24/7 machine rhythm. And so observing, what does the pace of capitalism look like, feel like to you? Feel like in your body. Come back home to your body. What does it feel like to you? And then what might the pace of trust feel like to you? And that can be a magical, wild frickin' ride, because we, in our stories, in our narratives, think of the natural world of often moving at and we talked about this morning, moving at this slow rhythm, don't know when things are going to happen, but actually it moves in seasons and cycles and systems. And sometimes I really relate to the ocean, because she can be this beautiful, calm, quiet, gentle, reflective space, and the next day be these like massive waves. And I resonate with that. That can be the pace of trust. That can be the pace of the natural world when we tune into it, when we lean into trusting ourselves, our own natural rhythms, the rhythms of the world we're in, the rhythms of the circles, the ecosystems that we are in, is there will be these massive waves of transformation that happen. But it won't happen when we are stuck over here in this other pace, and we are disconnected from our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our spirits. So I invite you to play with those in your own world as an individual. What does the pace of capitalism mean to me? And what might the pace of trust of the natural world feel like?
Thank you so much. I think that's our time. Perfect ending. Thank you very much for coming today, everyone, and we'll see you.